Hello class. So in this video I'm gonna talk about Deliverable 1. Deliverable 1 is the same for everybody, so everybody has to do the exact same work. Deliverable 1 is described over here, so let's go to our website real quick. So when you go to Deliverable 1 description, you're gonna notice that this right now is a work in progress. Deliverable 1 is complete. However, when you scroll to Deliverable 2 and Deliverable 3, you're gonna notice that this is a work in progress. What I'm doing is that I'm trying to find you all the resources that you need that are accurate and from reputable sources. For example, for those of you who are working with a web server, right? Those of you who are doing the custom project and want to set up a web server, right? This is a very good tutorial from a reputable source that is actually a step by step and doesn't leave things behind unexplained. So that's what I'm trying to do to help you during your process. However, Deliverable 1 is already complete. And since everybody has to do Deliverable 1, regardless of what project you're doing, it makes sense that we get to work on it. As you can see, Deliverable 1's due date is on the 25th of this month, which is give you enough time to prepare a decent document with this information over here. So with that said, let's get started. So the first thing that I want to do is that I want to open my CIS 106 repository, and I want you to create a folder called Final Project. So once you create a folder called Final Project over here, you are going to, once we get, let me just delete that because we really don't need that. Or at least, you know, that's irrelevant for us right now because I'm going to explain that anyway. So once you create that folder, you're going to open VS Code, and then you're going to open your final project folder over here. Notice the little arrow, and I'm going to create a new file called deliverable1.md. Right, and then let's put our font matter right now. So name, student name, and then class CIS 106, and then and then semester, spring 22. Okay, so now that we've done that, we'll delete that. Let's take a look at the requirements that our project has. So your project needs to include all of this, right? You need to have all of these requirements met. So what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna copy this and I'm gonna paste it over here in my folder, in my file, so that I can create a structure for my document. And the first thing that we're gonna do is that we're gonna create a title 1 here. We're gonna call this Deliverable 1, right? And then introduction to the project. This is going to be heading number 2, right? You can either call it introduction or you can call it project description, whichever of the two you prefer. I personally like, if you're gonna be doing the default project, call it introduction, makes more sense. But if you're gonna be doing a custom project, it's better for you to call it project description. So I'm gonna leave this to your discretion. To your discretion. How do you want to name this particular part of your project over here? Next, we are gonna do the requirements, right? So your project has both hardware and software requirements. You're gonna list those over here in a bulleted list. Then we are gonna go with a section called What is Ubuntu, and that section is gonna include a couple of subsections. The first one being the short history of Linux, and then you're gonna have another subsection called Linux distributions, and then in here you're just gonna talk about Slackware, you're gonna talk about Debian, you're gonna talk about Ubuntu and Kali Linux. Those are Debian distributions, so it will make sense for you to include them over there. And finally, I want you to talk about Red Hat Enterprise Linux and Fedora. Right, so we're gonna put it over there like that. After you finish the Linux distribution section, we're gonna go back to another section called Open Source versus Closed Source, and then finally the free software movement, which is also another heading number 2. Right, so let's save our document and do a little quick preview. See how our document is looking like. So we have heading 1, perfect. And just to make it pretty, I'm gonna do a little horizontal line over here, just to make it pretty, you know. Then we have introduction to the project. Then we have project hardware and software requirements. Here I just want a bulleted list of your requirements and a brief description if required. So if you're doing the default project, for example, you need to have a computer that can virtualize and a hypervisor installed. That's the only two things that you need when it comes to software and hardware. But if you're doing a custom project like a web server, then you know, well, what are you going to be running this web server from? A virtual machine or a Raspberry Pi, right? So make sure to include all the requirements over there, hardware and software. Then over here, so just for the sake of argument, let's just populate this file so that you can take a look at how it's gonna look like so far. So lorem, I'm gonna insert lorem, insert a line, right? And again, I'm just putting dummy text here because I want you to see how your file is gonna be looking like so far. So let's assume that my project only has these requirements and that's it. So sorry, this is the introduction. Okay, so let me cut that out of there because that's not what I meant. So I meant to put that over here. And then for the introduction, don't go crazy. 1 paragraph is fine. 1 paragraph is okay. 5 to 8 sentences, that's good enough. Again, in the introduction, you're just introducing your project. Like, what are you going to do? So if you're doing the default project, you know, you are demonstrating how to use Ubuntu as an everyday operating system, blah, 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 blah. I mean, you took composition, you know how to BS. Just 1 paragraph explaining your project so that if somebody that's non-technical gets to read your project, they can get an idea of what this project is about after reading the introduction. And the same thing goes for the project description. You know, try to introduce what the project is about, what kind of problem you're trying to solve, and that's about it. Again, don't go crazy. 1 paragraph is fine. This is not a writing intensive course anyway, so just make sure it's spelled properly. You know, no run-on sentences, just things like that. I'm only gonna take points if your English is unreadable. Like if you have so many run-on sentences that it's impossible to understand what you're saying, then yeah, I will take points off. If you have like a gazillion, like 5, 6, 7, 8 misspelled words in a single paragraph, you know, that yeah, I'll have to take points off because that's not professional at all. You know, but I can overlook a mistake here and there. Just try to adhere to the minimum requirement at least. Next, I'm gonna close this because we don't really need it open for now. Next, in what is Linux, you already have this information. Again, I'm looking for 1 paragraph here, 5 to 8 sentences. So after you do this part over here, then short history of Linux. There are multiple formats you can use here. You can use an image, you can use bulleted points, you can create a table, however you choose to do it. If you choose to do either a table or a bulleted list, don't include more than 10 events. 10 events is fine, 10 significant events. You can do a paragraph too, but if you choose to do paragraphs, at least 2 paragraphs describing short history of Linux, that's it. 10 significant events, 1 picture, 2 paragraphs, however you choose. For the sake of this example, I'm gonna choose 2 paragraphs. I'm gonna go with 3, you know, just for the sake of argument here. But again, you can choose a table, you can put a picture, but if you do a picture, put a brief description over there. Try to make your document look professional. That's the whole point of this. Then when it comes to Linux distribution, this part over here, I'm looking for a specific formatting. So for instance, talking about Slackware, what we're gonna do is that we're gonna create a bullet point here, right? Slackware, Debian, and then Red Hat. Right, so I want you to talk about them over here. What is a Slackware? Talk briefly about it. And once you're done, do the same thing with Debian. what is Debian, talk briefly about Debian, and then move along with this. We are gonna do a block quote over here talking about Debian-based Linux distribution. And then let's bold this over here. And then you're gonna talk about Ubuntu a little bit and talk about Kali Linux a little bit and leave it alone. This is a block quote. I want this to be exactly how you see it over here, right? Just to practice our markdown a little, because you're gonna need it for the rest of the project. Again, 1, 2, 3 bulleted points, and one block quote, and then another block quote to talk about Fedora. I'm gonna insert the paragraph here, just a paragraph here, and then just a paragraph here. Okay. Now let's preview this real quick. This is the outcome that I'm looking for. You see, this is the outcome that I'm sort of looking for. If you can get to this point, then you're good. If you get it like this, you're fine. You can opt for making a table over here as well, but I wouldn't. It's unnecessary work. Okay. So next, open source versus closed source. Now here, I want this. In the first paragraph, I want you to describe what is open source and what is closed source. Then I want you to write a little table. See it? Advantages of open source, right? And over here, you can list in a bulleted list the advantages of open source, or you can create a table of advantages and disadvantages of open source and closed source. However you choose, but I need you to include that. Advantages of open source, advantages of closed source, there you go. If you include these two things, you'll get the grade. But I'm looking forward to seeing a properly formatted table over there. Take it as a challenge. But hey, you don't have to. If you do it this way, you get the grade. Just saying. Then after that, over here in the free software movement, make sure you describe the free software movement. You talk briefly about Richard Stallman, and then you include the 4 freedoms. All of the information that I've discussed here, we already have discussed it during class. You have it in your presentations, and you have researched it as well, and you have either listened or watched them during your discussion board. So none of this should be alien to nobody. On top of everything, you're welcome to use sources from outside of the class, like, stuff you find in the book, stuff you found on the internet, as long as you then create a little section here called sources. And then you list your sources over there. Don't worry about the formatting of your sources. We are going to do that at the end of the semester. For now, you can simply just list them over there. If it was a website, place the URL. If it was a book, the name of the book and the chapter that you're quoting. And that's about it. Once you're done with this, you're going to right click and you're going to export to PDF. I need the markdown file and the PDF file for this. Make sure everything is inside your final project. And by the way, if you desire, you can put pictures in this one. I don't require any picture for Deliverable 1. But if you want to, you are welcome to do so. You have the freedom to make this document look as professional as possible. Okay, after this, we're going to do Git Pull to make sure our GitHub repository is up to date in our computer. Git add period to add the changes to our repo. Git commit -m to save these changes or to label these changes. I'm gonna call this final project deliverable 1. And then we're gonna do a git push. Now, when you go to Blackboard, you're gonna notice that in Blackboard we have here in final project deliverable 1. We did Steel Day. We already did all of this, right? We included as much of this as we could or as was necessary. What are you gonna give me? Well, when you try to submit, you are gonna give me the PDF file, the Markdown file, and the URL to your GitHub repo. I need those three things in this document, in this submission. With that said, if you have any questions about your deliverable one, you let me know. There is no extension on this assignment. You have plenty of time, and nothing discussed here is new. Have a good one, and I'll catch you later.